Eva, welcome to Shape Your Pottery and share with me what is something that has helped you the most on your pottery journey so far.
Hello, Nick. Thank you so much for having me on. I was thinking about that, and really, at every stage of my career, community has been a big part of my journey. From both when I first left college and I found my way to the Washington Clay Artists Association, to later when I was feeling stalled, I did such things as taking a class at the Community Arts Center or doing a residency, to later doing art retreats. And also through all of it, the wood frying community has really been a big part of my career.
Absolutely love that. Shape Your Nation, the more you get around other artists and other potters, the better your pottery will grow. I absolutely love that. So tell me the story how you got started making pottery.
So, to some degree, I've always made pottery, or rather, it's hard to find a distinct start point. Because I was lucky enough that I remember those terrible ashtrays slash coin jars that you'd make in elementary school, and then summer camp, we'd make pots and whatnot. I started really liking it in middle school, where our middle school had a ceramic studio, and that's where I first started throwing pots. In high school, I was lucky enough to do the Pennsylvania Governor's School for the Arts, and I'd hoped to attend. It was a free program for high school students in the state of Pennsylvania. It was a 5-week program. It was really cool. I'd wanted to attend as a sculptor, instead ended up attending as a potter. And at that point, that's the first time I started considering art and specifically pottery as a career. Before that, I had thought I was going to go into science.
I love that. So you did a residency in Denmark. Can you tell me the story about this?
Yeah, so I did 2 residencies over the years, actually both in Denmark at Gulego. And the first one was really interesting because I went and I proposed, okay, I've been making my creatures for a while. I want to see what happens when I make a whole large number of them. Are they still as cute when there's 100 flying creatures with teeth at eye level? How does this change? And so I proposed that to them, and they're like, yeah, no, that sounds good. And I get over there and I just start making these beasts, these little flying beasts. And the director of the program was like, okay, so where do you want to install these? And I was like, oh, I don't know, a closet would be fine. Wherever works for you. And she's like, okay. Well, I've asked around, and you can either do an installation at the mayor's office or in the local high school. I went, what? And so I ended up installing these nearly 100 flying beasts in the high school of Skelskol, Denmark. And they're only installed for 2 weeks. But that ended up being my first taste of public art, and just how much artwork changes when you put the viewer in the formula, when you start interacting with the people seeing your work, and when you start putting your work, not making your work not just for yourself, but for everyone.
What were you feeling when you got this opportunity to put your flying creatures up in the high school?
I was really excited about it, but I also didn't know what to expect because I'd never had my work presented to the general public like that before. And so once it was there and I saw the faces of all of the students coming by to see it and how much they enjoyed it, and how they weren't expecting it, it was such a delight. That really blew me away. But something where I hadn't realized I was missing that before that moment.
Absolutely love that. So, how did this experience impact the way you make your sculptures today?
So that was my first taste of public art. And I came back from that, and I actually applied to a couple grad schools, but then nothing was the right fit. And instead, I ended up taking those ideas and going to the City of Seattle Public Art Boot Camp, which is a program that they offered to take take artists in general who didn't have any public art experience and to give them a walkthrough of what it was like to get involved in public art and just start making work there. And the effect the whole experience ended up having is it ended up diversifying my work massively. I still make my ceramic creatures. I still make my small, cute ceramic creatures. But I also am finding other ways of making my work. I make my work out of bronze, out of chicken netting. I did an installation in 2020 of a bunch of my creatures, but made out of chicken wire hiding in trees for people to enjoy. And it's something where it's been a very key stepping point into like diversifying how I make my own sculptures, which has been very fun.
Absolutely love that. So, what is something you learned during this time that helped you with your own sculptures?
To not be afraid of repetition. This piece that set this all off was 100 flying creatures all in a swarm. And since then, I've made new versions of that same piece. I've found ways. I found that if I come back to the same idea multiple times, I keep finding new things. I keep growing every time I look at it. It's like people will say, like, you can't cross the same stream twice. Because even though, like, you might physically be in the same location, everything around you is different. And so with artwork, if you just keep coming back to the same idea, you can grow in new ways that you might not be expecting. And that's honestly a lesson as an artist that took me a while to learn, especially coming out of college, where like you make an idea once, you're done, it's on to the next thing. But instead, I feel like revisiting ideas has led to some of my most unexpected growth in the past few years.
I love that. Shaping Nation, you can revisit old ideas and old techniques that you've used in the past. And by revisiting them, you can also make it 10 times better because you already had that experience. I love that. So let's talk about your sculptures. Can you tell me a story, how you started making the sculptures that you make today?
So after I left college, I wanted to be a potter. I was trying to decide to either do pottery or go on to grad school in chemistry. And I ended up being an assistant for a person. And I was not a very good potter. And I love pottery. I love the joy of it. But I honestly don't have the eye for it. And so as I was trying to make pots and trying to improve my skills there, I was also making little monsters out of the scraps just for fun. And at some points I was like, have you ever thought about just focusing on the creatures? And I did, and over time they grew in ways that I wasn't expecting. And I created a whole vocabulary and a whole world of these little creatures that were first just trimming scraps.
So you mentioned that you felt like you didn't have the eye for pottery. Tell me more about that.
I'm not sure how much it's not having the eye or not having the patience. Or perhaps, to put it a better way, I feel like I had too strong of an eye for my own work's flaws. When I was making pottery, I wasn't coming up with designs that really were inspiring to me. And instead, I'd just see the flaws in my own work. I tried. I have a lot of love of pottery. You know how it is.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Shaping Nation, if you feel like you're going through the motions with your pottery, try doing something else, because maybe what you're really just missing is just something more creative. I love that. So you are inspired by the overlap of humanity and wilderness. Can you tell me more about this?
I like taking ideas from each side and mixing it into the other. I like using creatures sort of as the stand-ins for people as I do explore storytelling and myth making and a lot of like folk tales. I love exploring the feel of folk tales. And a lot of that comes from using creatures in the place of humans as sort of a more approachable window into this world. And then on the other side, I love examining cities and humanity from in terms almost in terms of the biological imperative to grow. Where you look at bacteria, you look at anything, it spreads until it stops. And so with some of my creatures, I play around with the idea of the city is symbiote. And I have creatures that have whole cities growing on their backs.
I love that. I love hearing about that. That's so cool. And you could definitely tell a story when you do it that way. It tells a story in itself. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
So something interesting that you are doing is you are building a 16-foot wood kiln. Tell me the story how this came to be.
Yes. So I've been lucky enough to be wood firing for almost 20 years now. And a lot of this time has been in the same two kilns. And I've loved the community there. I will say I've seen the good sides of it, though I've also seen bad sides of it. And as I've been growing in that, as part of that, I've realized I want something with more flexibility. Where I've been helping to manage, or I was helping to manage this anagama for a few years, but every firing you had 15 to 20 people's work in it. And so that meant you had 15 to 20 people's hopes and dreams contained in that kiln. You don't want to try new things. You want to stick with what works. You don't want to mess up everyone's work. And so I decided that building a small kiln that would give me the flexibility to experiment and to try new things, and also to control my own schedule, which is very important to me as I'm committing to larger shows and larger projects. All of that came together, and I decided it was time to build my own kiln, which has been a pretty amazing journey.
So now, you mostly fire in wood fire. Why did you decide to go down that route instead of something else?
So my work is, when I sculpt it, my sculpting methods are very, very controlled. And I've tried loosening up, but that's just not how I sculpt. But on the other hand, when I put pieces into the kiln, it becomes this collaboration with fire, with ash, with the path of the flame. And I just love the unexpected results that come from that. I have enough experience with wood firing that I can design a piece for the kiln, and I can know, okay, the color on this side will be different from this side. I can load it this direction, which means the flame will go over here. And while I can never know exactly what's going to happen, it gives me just enough control over the piece that it just becomes a magic working. It creates magic art working with science and fire, and it's hard to get better than that.
So you mentioned control while you're making just sculptures.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me more about that.
I have a nearly pathological need to make everything really, really smooth. And so I'm working on pieces, and I do so much of my refining using a sure form, using a tool to just shave off clay. And I joke because I had a friend who talking together, we decided sculpture is about the second derivative. It's the second derivative. You aren't necessarily looking at the curve of a line. You're looking at something even smaller, which is the rate of change of that curve. Is it moving up at a continuous rate? Is it slowing? Changing the angle of a limb or of a shoulder changes so much in a piece. And I'll sit there as I sculpt, just removing bits and pieces with a sure form until everything's just right and everything's just so smooth and nice.
I definitely agree with you on that because when I'm making my sculptures, I definitely notice I'll sit there and I'll be like, okay, is this pose good or is this pose good? And moving one little thing can actually have a really big impact. I love that.
Oh yeah, it takes all the tiny details to make a whole.
Absolutely, I love that. If someone is looking to elevate their own sculptures or get started with making sculptures, what are 3 things they should know to make the best possible sculptures they can?
So I'd been thinking about this for a bit. And it's interesting because the 3 answers I have are radically divergent. And the first one is practice. In a way, it's like pottery. your body is going to learn as you do it. And like just coming back again and again and putting yourself in the chair will make your work grow in ways that you don't expect. I often find that if I'm stuck, getting into the studio can be so hard, but once my hands are in the clay, I can find a way forward. I make progress and in ways that I'd never expect. And then the second thing is try something new. Thinking back, a lot of my growth has been signing up for a class or just finding something entirely different from what I've been doing. And it could be taking a bronze casting class. It could be doing the art retreat that I mentioned earlier. It's just suddenly working with other artists who do something entirely different from you can open your eyes to entirely new ways of working with clay, to working with art, or even working with people. And then I think the third thing, honestly, is put all the art away and just take a walk. There could be a good thing to be said for, like, you've stared at the piece for long enough, you aren't seeing anything new, just go take a walk, take a nap, do something not in the studio, and let your brain relax a little bit. Like, when you're farming, there's fallow seasons, or times when you leave the land alone for a season, and it lets everything regenerate. And so rest is actually pretty useful also.
Absolutely agree. I love that. To recap a little bit, Shaping Nation, number one is to practice. Practice is probably the most important thing that you can do in anything in art, just practice. Number two is try something new, because getting new ideas can come from anywhere. And number three is take a break, take a walk, and let yourself to be refreshed. I love those three pieces of advice. Let's talk about the business side of pottery. Can you tell me about the moment when you decided to go full-time as a potter?
So I was lucky enough to have support from my partner, which it's very interesting to sort of talk about because not everyone does. And it helped me a lot on my road. Originally, when I first came out of college, I was trying to decide whether to focus on art or whether to focus on chemistry, which I did sort of a split major in college. And I worked part-time at a chem lab. And eventually I realized that my path was in art, and I switched to focusing on that full-time. It's around then that I was starting to develop the creatures. And I had a conversation with my partner of, do I focus more on creating a commercial line, on doing craft fairs, on focusing, or do I focus more on growing the work, maybe focus on the gallery route and see where it goes? So that was the moment I decided to focus more on just taking the time to see where the work grows.
How did you finally decide upon growing your work instead of going the other route?
I was lucky enough to have the support of my partner, because we sat down, we talked about it, and he said that he would support me in this as I worked to figure out the right path for my own sculptures, instead of having to immediately focus on the salability aspect first versus the sort of letting it grow and letting it find the correct path over time more gradually.
Absolutely love that. So what would you say has helped you the most being able to sell your own sculptures?
So I've lucked out just with the timing of how I developed my work and my presence online and how the internet has grown with me. So the first few times my work went viral, it was on Tumblr back in the day. And this is back when I was not on Instagram, I was on Etsy and Flickr. And so I definitely am very thankful for the fact that as my work has grown, there's been the correct platform to step into each time. However, I was thinking about it, and if there's one thing that helped the aspect of selling my work online, it was the point where I decided to stop doing pre-sales. Because originally, back when I was on Etsy and just posted my pictures on Flickr. I had a few very loyal customers who'd supported me across the years, and as a thank you for them, every time I did a wood firing, I would send out a private link to the pictures, and people, my existing customer base, could get first dibs on things. However, eventually I realized that wasn't particularly fair, and I just opened all of the sales all at once to everyone. And once I did that, my sales absolutely took off. Because it turned out that the other people weren't interested in having a second choice, or having the pieces that were other buyers' second choices. It just didn't feel as nice. So opening my sale just as a single shop launch all at once with no pre-sales has made the process much smoother. And initially it was more equitable, and it seems to have gone pretty well. My only problem with it now is I'm at a point where the demand has outstripped my ability to make sculptures. And so I often get very sad emails about people trying to buy things during my shop launches only to click go and have it already be sold. So the same shop launch that worked so well for me at sort of early/mid-career is now being a little bit of a trouble spot later in my career.
What were you feeling when all this when you stopped doing pre-sales and you just opened it up for everyone?
It's been wild to see the growth. I'm so thankful for it. It got to the point where when I was first generally selling out every time I did a sale, it was such an amazing feeling. And it's very strange because I feel like over the past maybe 5 years from when this first started happening, it feels almost like I accidentally created a monster, because I'm watching this demand grow. I'm like, oh, this is so great. This is so exciting. And now it's like, oh, it's a little scary. Oh no, it's really like breaking people's hearts. And that really like bothers me a lot. And so it's very interesting to be at a point where like this sales method is working for me financially, but I'm going to need to try and figure out a new method sometime in the future that's more equitable, that does a lottery or something like that, because it makes me so sad when people get their hearts broken over sculptures.
Now, what advice would you give to someone looking to start selling their own sculptures?
Persistence, the ability to show your progress as you're working on a piece, the ability to interact with everyone, with a general audience as you're making your sculpture is very important. It's real neat for people to see the process that goes into it, to see the work that goes into it, to see the love that goes into it. And it definitely means that you end up spending more time on social media than is really ideal. But at the same time, you're making really important connections with people, and people are making really important connections with your work.
Some excellent advice right there. Let's talk about discovering your voice. Can you tell me about the moment when you knew you were heading in the right direction with your sculptures?
So it's hard to pinpoint a specific moment from my entire career. But I know in any given batch of work that I'm making, I'll often run into points where I just look at a piece and it'll make me laugh. It'll make me smile. And if I'm working on a sculpture and I hit that point where I'm like, oh, this is going to be good, that's always one of my favorite points to reach as I'm making a sculpture.
I love that. Shaping Nation, there's going to be probably moments in your pottery or your sculptures where you're going to have a smile on your face and you're laughing. That is when you know you're going in the right direction with your pottery. I love that. What would you say was your biggest obstacle when it came to discovering your own voice?
There's been times when I have felt sort of trapped within my own body of sculpture, because my creatures are very distinct and I'll periodically feel sort of stuck within them. But at the same time, I always manage to work through it. I find new ways to say the things that I want to say. I don't limit myself to just the creatures. And so every time I come back to them, it's very exciting to find new ways of exploring art and the messages I want to say using the same visual language of my creatures.
I absolutely love that. And it goes back to going back to repetition as well. Like you said earlier. I love that. So, what advice would you give to someone looking to discover their own unique voice with their pottery?
Patience. It just takes time. It takes time. It takes making things. Once you've been doing things for maybe 5 to 7 years, you'll be able to look back and you can see your early work and you'll be able to see your voice you can see things early on where you're like, oh, I see. From that piece, I grew in this way, I grew in this way, I grew in this way. But at the moment, as you're making things, you don't know which of the pieces you're making are those early steps. And so you've got to just keep making things and accept that it's going to take years to figure out exactly who you are as an artist and that the path will become evident in time.
Some excellent words of advice right there. Eva, it has been great chatting with you today. And as we're coming to a close here, what is one thing you want to hammer home with my listeners today?
Keep at it. I realize that it's a theme that I keep coming back through all of this, but just getting yourself into the studio and putting your hands to work and figuring out where they will take your mind is always just a wonderful step to take.
Some excellent parting words of advice. Eva, it's been so great chatting today. Where can my listeners go and learn more about you?
Probably the easiest spot right now is on Instagram. I'm on Instagram at Eva Funderburgh. I also have a website, evafunderburgh.com, and I'll be probably posting updates about my new wood kiln, which I'm hoping to fire for the first time in April.